The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, episode number 69.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Voyager episode, The Cloud. Joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Corey Stika. Hi, Father Corey.
How's it going?
Very well. Before we get to talk about The Cloud, I have a few things that are out in the news as we're recording this, so we want to talk about those first. But I also want to first ask you, as a listener, if you can share the podcast with your friends, find your Trekkie friends, hold them down, and download subscribe to this podcast, The Secrets of Star Trek, on their phones. Help them find us and join this community of listeners. We love to have, we keep getting more and more people joining this community of Star Trek fans, and we really love that. And so we want to spread the love and have more people listening to the show. So if you could do that, we'd really appreciate it. So let's get to some news headlines. Again, as we're recording, we recently had a holiday in the United States, which is not really a holiday, but it's it's one of those things where someone passes a resolution and some politician does, and it marks a date. It was Constitution Day, which is the anniversary of the day that the United States Constitution was finally ratified, which now I'm trying to remember the exact date, but I think it was September 19th. It was somewhere in the mid-September. But what makes it significant for Star Trek fans is that it was also the same day was the anniversary of 1976, that the Space Shuttle Enterprise was unveiled by NASA. And most Trek fans know the story that the Trekkies petitioned and organized and got NASA to name the shuttle after the Starship Enterprise. In that period of time between the series ending and the movies, there was no Trek, and so everyone felt like the first
other than
space
animated.
shuttle. Other than animated, right? And the animated, I think, was done by that point too. So, but there's more to the story.
Everybody knows that image of the video of where Leonard Nimoy was there.
Nimoy, Kelly, Forrest Kelly, and James Doohan.
Yeah,
they were all
there at this big event. NASA kind of played that story up, but you're saying there was more?
Yes. So it was the connection to Constitution Day is that the space shuttle was originally going to be called Constitution, but because NASA wanted to promote the idea of international cooperation and all those other all this other elements that they wanted to make this a human endeavor into space, as opposed to an American endeavor. We were trying to expand this to a more human activity. They felt like some politicians and government officials felt like Constitution was too American, but that Enterprise was a hopeful word and a more broad-based, and doesn't hurt that it gets a very large proportion of people who are space-oriented in the populace, taxpayer, voter populace, to support it as well. And I'm going to guess that, in fact, I've heard that NASA was full of Star Trek fans. There was so many
I'm sure.
Trekkies there. But this article, which I'll link in the show notes, it was very interesting because it includes some stuff I didn't know before, like the fact that the phrase "to go where no man has gone before" originated from Dwight D. Eisenhower's presidency. When he was president, he used that phrase when talking about our future efforts at space exploration, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I've never heard that one.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, and there was some talk in it that maybe the Star Trek influence wasn't as great as some people thought. That maybe President Ford liked the name because of the aircraft carriers named Enterprise, were very famous, and at the time, the USS Enterprise aircraft carrier was the first nuclear-powered carrier. It was a symbol of American military-industrial complex might and all that sort of stuff. So there's some factors.
Then there's another phrase that goes to the Eisenhower administration: military-industrial complex. He popularized that. Yeah,
that's true. I
warning us
totally
about
unconsciously. It. Yeah. So I thought it was interesting. I'll put the link in the show notes. You can read more about that at Real Clear Politics. So another bit of news. This is sad news for Trek fans, and you're probably hearing this a few weeks after we've recorded this, so you might already know this. But Erin Eisenberg, who played Nog on Deep Space Nine, has passed away this past weekend as we're recording. He was 50 years old. He had lifelong health problems, chronic health problems. He had some kidney issues apparently, and we don't have there's not an official statement on what caused his death, but it's probably related to his ongoing health issues in his life. He was 50 years old. I found that surprising, because that meant that when they were filming, with where Nog and Jake were supposed to be early teens, but Erin Eisenberg was in his 20s, mid-20s,
early to mid-20s, because he was 7 years older than me, and I was senior year in high school when DS9 first season came out.
Right.
So he would have been college age, if not into mid-20s by that point.
Interesting.
It's fascinating.
I know the character Dr. Bashir was my age because they had an episode where he was turning 30 when I was turning 30.
It's very weird to go back and look at these things and see how young everybody was and realize, oh, they were older than I am, or they were younger than I was. Or
except Rene Auberjonois, I don't think he's ever been young. Even when he was on Benson, he wasn't young.
Soap, yeah.
Oh, I remember from before Benson when he was guest starring when he guest starred on the Bob Newhart show in the 70s. He was mature then.
Yeah, and so we say a prayer for Erin Eisenberg. That he would rest in peace. Pray for his family. He was newly married. He and his wife were married a
couple of years
not long ago. And in 2016, they were engaged, and they got married in December, this past December. And they apparently had he had a couple of children. He had 2 sons. So rest in peace. So
yeah.
Jimmy, you had some Babylon 5 news following up from our episode.
Also, while we're still on Star Trek news, though, I ran across some stories this weekend that indicated that 2 of the 6 upcoming short treks are going to be animated.
Right.
And so they may be springboards into one or both of the new animated series.
Interesting.
Right. So I was able to confirm that on some news websites, so it looks like that one's true. In terms of the Babylon 5 news, so I mentioned recently that I read J. Michael Straczynski's book, Becoming Superman. It's his autobiography. And I mentioned at the time that, and it focuses a lot on his upbringing and his family. He's the creator of Babylon 5. And I knew that he had kind of a rough upbringing, and I had no idea how rough. I mean, as I said last time, there are actual war crimes involved. Not committed by him as a small child, but but there are actual war crimes involved. Well, there were also some revelations about the history of the Babylon 5 universe that fans have wondered about for a long time. One of them was the connection between Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine, and I mentioned last time that based on evidence that has subsequently come to light, he thinks there was more deliberate copying than he previously had thought. Previously, he had thought that maybe some of the higher-up suits kind of guided the Star Trek producers in the direction of what he had proposed for Babylon 5, but without them knowing that's what was happening. But he thinks it was more conscious. The other thing that I didn't mention last time is what happened to the show Crusade. This was the spinoff of Babylon 5. It was meant to be another 5-year show. Right. It ended up lasting half a season and was released. It was canceled before it was ever aired, and it was just released as a miniseries. And what happened to abort that series has been a long-standing question for fans. J. Michael Straczynski in recording the DVD commentary for it, said he would only record it if he got to tell the story of what happened. And he did record it, and they didn't release the commentary. And and then they came out with a series of books called that are script books of, for all the Babylon 5 scripts, and then they have done all the Crusade scripts. But they were releasing a book in this series, or a set of books, called Crusade, What the Hell Happened? And they only released the first volume, and no subsequent volumes have ever appeared, and it was indicated there was legal trouble or something that was preventing them from releasing these books. So there's been this big mystery. And in Becoming Superman, he talks about it. He says basically, so originally Babylon 5 was released on the Primetime Entertainment Network, or P10. It was a show that was owned by a network that was owned by Warner Brothers, but it was a syndication network. So you could, like Next Gen, you could air this show on any kind of station that wanted to buy it. It didn't have to be in network. And P10 ended up folding after Babylon 5's fourth season. So they needed a new home for the fifth season. And TBS, the Turner Broadcasting System, picked them up. And so TBS picked them up. They made the fifth season. They made several TV movies for TBS. And then TBS commissioned Crusade. And as they were filming Crusade, TBS got the results of some internal marketing studies that showed their fans, their existing audience base, and the Babylon 5 fans were two different groups. So what would happen is the Babylon 5 fans would tune in to TBS to watch Babylon 5 and nothing else. They didn't stay to watch anything else on TBS. Right. Meanwhile, the TBS fans would tune away when Babylon 5 was on the air and only come back when it was not on the air. And so they weren't building their audience, and they didn't view this as financially desirable to just swap these audiences this way. They wanted to grow their audience like any television network. But by this point, they had already financially committed to this season of Crusade. And so how are they going to get out of this? Well, the only way they could think to do it was to argue that Straczynski's production house was not giving them the series they were asking for, because then they could say, okay, you're in violation of contract, so we're canceling the series and we'll move on. And so to argue successfully that Straczynski was not giving them the show they wanted, they started to make deliberately unreasonable demands, and that they knew, so they could box Straczynski into not going along with the demands. And then that would give them the legal pretext they needed to cancel the show and cut their financial losses mid-production. And Straczynski says that in his book that this was later explained to him after the fact by an executive who had worked there, and that, yes, these were not, as everybody recognized, these were unreasonable demands. That was the point.
What a shock.
Yes, TV executives acting badly.
Yeah, so that's Straczynski's story anyway.
That's his story, and he's sticking to it. No,
I remember, that when Crusade came out, wanting to watch it and not being able to because could not find it, in syndication. Mm-hmm. Just one of those. Yeah, it was a tough time. I can imagine. I imagine what it would be like today. Where all these streaming networks constantly need content. It would be a different story. That these sorts of things would survive. Perhaps where they didn't then.
We already see things like Arrested Development where they get canceled by their primary network, and then someplace like Netflix picks them up for another season or two.
Right.
So we're seeing stuff like that happen where shows that people like are being picked up.
I wonder if we'd be better off if they didn't.
I never watched it, so I don't know if it's good, but it does happen.
I tried a few episodes of Arrested Development. I'd heard that it really pays off later on as as the storyline and the comedy builds, that it really gets very sophisticated and there are incredible comedy connections in it later. But in watching the first few episodes, I said, ugh, there's too much going on here that is not part of my worldview.
Right. Well, something related to Trek, and a similar example is the Orville, which is moving from Fox to Hulu.
Oh,
which is interesting. Yeah, a little disappointing because it means that it's going to have a sectioned off audience now. You have to now go seek it out. That might be more difficult.
Yet another paywall, but
right. And I've heard varying reasons why. One of them is Fox once again doesn't get sci-fi. Firefly. So that hasn't changed much. But also that that gives the Orville a little bit freer hand, or it gives the writers a freer hand in streaming than they do on broadcast television, which I don't think is actually a good thing in the long run, given what's his name's proclivities.
We had talked about how Seth MacFarlane basically wanted to do Star Trek, and Fox wanted a comedy, so he promoted it as a Star Trek-like comedy. Right. But he, of course, over this 2 seasons so far, has moved it away from the comedy. It's much, much, much less comedic in the second season than it is in the first.
True.
It's still there because it's still Seth MacFarlane. He still can't help having bodily humor jokes in his shows. That's who he is.
Right. Right.
But it's not what Fox wanted, and it's kind of getting. I think just my thinking too is I wonder if he saw the writing on the wall that if maybe he got a kind of an ultimatum from Fox is no, we wanted a comedy, not Star Trek.
Right.
You're giving us Star Trek, not a comedy.
Now, of course, this is all still in the same family now because Fox is part of Disney, and Hulu is owned by Disney, so it's moving within the Disney empire.
Everything is owned by Disney now.
Yeah, everything is owned by Disney. So anyway,
it's interesting to tie it back into Babylon 5 when as people will know, Babylon 5 is about this great war in space. It doesn't break out until the second season, but it's it's this war and how it affects empires and empires rise and fall and stuff like that. And if you go back and read the original writer's Bible and series pitch for Babylon 5 that they showed Network Suits, they explained the show as it's the United Nations in space. Its purpose is to prevent war. So there's always this looming threat of war that they're avoiding, and the war never actually breaks out. And this was this was to assure the Suits this is not a show about a war in space. It's about the opposite. It's about preventing war, to make it seem like friendlier, to the network executives. But Straczynski knew full well this is about a war. And it just reminds me every time I think of that of Commander Sinclair's line in the pilot episode, "Everybody lies." And certainly that happens in Hollywood.
All right. So let's, as you might guess, our title for this episode is about the Voyager episode, The Cloud.
And all the discussion to this point shows you how interested we are in that episode.
Yes. Well, we should still talk about it.
when I think of the title of The Cloud, all I can think of is Toy Story. You get the aliens in the little the game sheet.
The claw.
The claw.
Yeah,
the cloud.
I keep flashing on Get Smart, and one of his villains, the Craw.
The Craw. Yeah. So this Voyager episode, so we're still first season. They're still fleshing out these characters, and there's a huge part of that. I should say right at the beginning, some of the producers were just as unhappy with this story as we are. From the beginning. They thought it was a big mess and a troubled script right from the beginning.
We recently did an episode of Deep Space Nine, which I criticized for it's doing so much world building. It's doing so much telling us about these characters that the plot never gels. And you've got all these different subplots happening, and you don't have the classic A story with a B story where you get to drill down into both stories and really bond with them emotionally. We have the same exact problem here. The A story is about this nebula that they meet.
Yet another cloud in space, which we've had like 2 or 3 of already in this series.
And so that's the A story. They meet this cloud, and it's really simple. Basically, the plot is they enter a cloud, special effects happen, they use technobabble to injure the cloud, then they realize it's a being, so they use technobabble to heal the cloud, and more special effects happen. along with
Right.
the classic Voyager ending of people talking dramatically in front of consoles as the climax.
Right.
But then we have all these little bitty side plots. We've got this Janeway and Chakotay let's do peyote and get spiritual plot. We have Tom and Harry doing hijinks on the holodeck. We've got Neelix and Cass having drama, and it's just all over the place.
Right. Let's talk about some of the delve into some of these bits, just to kind of flesh it out a little. And like you said, this is yet another cloud thing that they encounter in space, and it's also another trope that they fall back to, which is a big space thing that turns out to be a form of life we've never encountered before, and that's what we're doing. I mean, it was a very obvious, plot device here. We start with more of this adapting to life in the Delta Quadrant. I have to confess, this scene between the captain and Neelix, where she's trying to get her morning coffee, and Neelix shames her into drinking the sludge that he's made as a coffee substitute, because she should set an example for the crew instead of using one of her rations, her replicator rations. I have this recollection of recently just seeing this, and I think I'm not sure where I saw it, but I'm looking at this, and it was just so uncomfortable. This interaction between Neelix and the captain, especially when he's complimenting her on how she looks today and her lipstick.
It's like he's putting the moves on her in the kitchen.
Well, so much of the dialogue in this episode was just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lots of it.
Right. There's this bit of dialogue between Kim and Paris and the captain about the proper emotional distance between captains and their subordinates. That's actually a key plot point here for some reason, which doesn't actually pay off. Well, I have to say one thing about Neelix and the captain encounter in the kitchen. The Neelix's kitchen set is actually, I have to say, is always pretty clever. Like all the things going on. Some set designer, some set dresser has had a lot of fun putting this together. I mean, things bubbling and burning and fire. And
something's always happening, and they're obviously they had a lot of fun putting every episode figuring out what was going to be going on in Neelix's kitchen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The downside of that is they have to use, or at least with their budget, they have to use Earth-based plants for everything that's supposed to be exotic.
Yes.
And so they've clearly gone to an exotic California supermarket and picked up, various items. And as someone living in California, it's like, oh, I know exactly what that is. I see that at the supermarket all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's like you'll have these exotic flowers and you can clearly see they're like, dyed lilies or something like that.
Right. So the as you say, Jimmy, the plot device is they detect this nebula and it has Omicron particles, which they can harvest to restore their depleted energy reserves. I don't know how. I don't think anybody has thought about what this means.
Well, that's yet another trope for this season is they're always low on resources, and thanks be to God, after the first season they get over that.
Right.
Because it's like every other episode is like, oh, we need to harvest more resources. We've lost more resources than we actually harvested.
Yes. Well, and that bugs me throughout this episode because all of this talk about, we're low on resources, and then they go and replicate stuff that's not necessarily like, for example, if you're low on energy, why is Tom Paris running the holodeck on a constant basis with this complicated Paris cafe bar thing? I mean, come on. That was just like, I'm sitting there, and even as a kid or a young adult watching this, I'm thinking, if you're low on energy, why are you running that?
You turn off the holodecks. Or you turn them into the old-fashioned entertainment of, like, a basketball court or something.
Right. Like, and they're drinking, holodeck champagne and stuff. Like, why not drink holodeck coffee then? Because, and then there's this sense that somehow it's not like Paris makes this comment that, oh, go ahead and drink the champagne. It's only holodeck champagne. Well, is it just force fields that you're drinking? Like, what makes it not like the other replicated stuff?
I guess the implication from that is that you'll have the experience of it going down your throat, but then that's it. You're not going to digest it.
That would be really weird.
Yeah, it just kind of disappears about halfway down your throat.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, I don't want that.
Then again, they can holographically create lungs inside someone, inside the closed chest cavity. So apparently, they can also create food and drink that actually will go down at least to your stomach and then disappear.
So, and as Jimmy mentioned, we have this scene where Chakotay and the captain have this discussion about Chakotay's Native American traditions, which becomes a ongoing thread in the show, which I would love to hear from Native Americans on what they think about this, because it seems pretty syncretic, like where, he is just Native American, as if all Native Americans are the same.
Well, they do later establish more about his heritage, that he's apparently a descendant of a tribe that I gather is fictional called the Rubber Tree People that is from Central America.
Right.
So they do pin it down a little more, but not initially. Father, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, because as far as I know, in what little I've worked with and studied Native American religions, at least up in this area, up in northern United States, that's not a part of their religion at all. They have the idea of can't say vision quest per se, but like the Sundance and things like that, where it's they have visions, and that's a part of the whole experience. But as far as having an animal that guides you, like kind of like what we would consider a guardian angel animal, I don't think that's a part of any tribe up here that I've ever heard of.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the idea that just anyone could pick one up, like you're not Native American, you don't follow their beliefs, but as long as you touch the magical peyote substitute machine that they've developed with technology, you get to encounter a spirit animal of your own, which it's kind of a weird lizard.
So I wanted to talk a bit about the spirit animal thing, because it's one of the most interesting things in this episode, but I think it's also one of the worst handled things in this episode. We have Janeway and Chakotay are on the bridge, and they're dealing with this nebula thing, and out of nowhere, Chakotay turns to Janeway and says, "We talk to animals."
Yeah.
And it's like, who is we here?
Right.
As she intuits, he means his culture does.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as she realizes that, she is like all over, so fascinated,
Right.
And we have this amazingly, I'm incredibly open to this dialogue, which is, on the one hand, I don't like the way they executed it, but I like the fact that she's open to this.
Yeah.
Because it does show, in keeping with Star Trek principles, it does show respect for another culture's beliefs. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, including spiritual ones. I also like it because it shows openness to the concept of religion in a way we haven't typically gotten on Star Trek up to this point. Right. After the original series.
Apart from DS9.
Yeah, but this is more like next-gen style storytelling, and we haven't gotten openness to religion in that.
Yep.
And so I like all that, but then I try to think, okay, what does this say about Janeway and her beliefs? Because she's not just respectful of another person's religion. She's like becoming an active participant. Mm-hmm. Now, that to me says that she, number one, doesn't have a strong faith of her own. Because me as a Catholic, I was like, okay, if you've got a guardian whatever that you talk to, that's your business. I'm respectful of you, but I have my own guardian angel already, thank you, and I'll stick with that.
Right.
And I'm certainly not going to be opening myself up to, oh, great, whatever, is there a powerful spirit willing to embrace Jimmy? And it's like, no, shut down the Ouija board right now.
Yeah, exactly.
We are not opening ourselves to being embraced by new spirits. I'll take the ones God has given me, thank you. So Janeway has apparently no firm belief system of her own, or she wouldn't be instantly receptive to participating in somebody else's. And part of what I don't like about this is there's this trope of certain cultures as being more spiritual and wise than others. Right. And this plays into that trope. It's like, if this was anybody else, if Chakotay wasn't a representative of a Native American culture, if he was like a New Age crystal person, and says, "Oh yeah, I've got a spirit animal, and I just came from the New Age crystal shop," Janeway would not be like, "Oh, I want one too."
Right.
It's because of the perception of Native American spirituality as automatically wise and superior to Janeway's European background that she is meant to find this interesting. And that actually produces reactions in Native American communities that are negative, because they see this kind of thing, rightly so, as a kind of spiritual tourism.
Yes.
Where you have people who aren't part of their culture and aren't seriously committed to their beliefs wanting to participate in rituals and things like that just because these people feel it's exotic. And it would be like somebody who's a spiritual tourist wanting to get baptized, from a Christian perspective. It's
or
like, no, you've got to be
communion.
serious about this.
Yeah.
Or receive communion, yeah. And so I thought it makes Janeway look like a spiritual tourist. And what does it then say about Chakotay? Because he's apparently been evangelizing these animal guides all over the crew. I mean, B'Elanna's already tried to kill hers. And now he's sharing it with the captain, and he's showing them this medicine bundle that he says he's never shown anyone before. I don't know why you didn't show it to B'Elanna.
Right.
And you have all this build up to Janeway getting her spirit animal, and then it's a gecko. And it doesn't even guide her. I mean, she's interrupted before she can ask it any questions. And it's like, well, why do you have a spirit guide if it's not going to do any guiding?
It would have told her to buy Geico auto insurance for her car.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I think that's basically what I had to say about that. But one side note, recently, and totally unrelated to this episode, I got an email from a colleague at work who told me that he had met a gentleman who's a parent of a child at a local Catholic school, and the parent told him that he was a big Jimmy Akin fan and that Jimmy Akin was his spirit animal. So I've never been anybody's spirit animal before, but I'll do my best.
So many jokes. Okay, so let's move on. So I think I want to concentrate on this one on some of the character moments and some of the funny bits, inconsistencies, as opposed to the plot. Because Jimmy, I think you summed it up pretty well. There's a moment on the bridge where Kim expresses, "Oh wow, I've never seen anything like that before." And Tuvok chastises him and says, "Senior officers should not show their inexperience to the junior officers." And I'm thinking, wasn't Kim just commissioned before this ship took off?
He is a junior officer.
He's a junior to get.
And who are the junior officers on the bridge? I mean, they're all. Everybody here is ensign rank and up, so you're all officers. We don't have any NCOs here.
Right. Well, and then, since when are Starfleet officers not allowed to express wonder at something new? You're in a wholly new part of the galaxy. Of course you're going to see new things. Oh, I have to pretend I've seen all this before.
I do like the way they turn that back on Tuvok, though, where he has, I can't remember exactly what he said, but basically is, I have no experience and Kim immediately calls him on it. So in other words, you've never seen that before either.
Yeah. And then he adds, "Don't worry, I won't tell the junior officers."
Yeah, that was clever though, where they kind of turned it back on him because in my opinion, I mean, again, having been in the military, there's a need for correction, but to just directly correct somebody who's not a direct report of yours,
right?
That can cause trouble. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I did think it was one of the best bits in the episode, though. That was genuinely funny when Kim burns Tuvok.
Yes, Tuvok did deserve to be burned on that one. So one of the things that drove me crazy through this episode was the distances as they talked about them. We're going to travel 12,000 kilometers on thrusters alone in what, weeks? No, just a couple seconds. Like what? So can't use warp power, can't use impulse engines. So we're going to use the old-fashioned reaction thrusters to move 5,000 kilometers in 3 seconds. I wish we had that technology. Or later on, they're talking about the Voyager is sitting in the wound gap of this creature, and Tuvok says the approaching matter is 30 kilometers away, and the special effects guys evidently didn't get the script in time. And it's like literally couple hundred feet from the back of the ship. Like it's literally bridging the gap. It was kind of driving me crazy throughout. And I know it's not the most important thing ever, but like, gotta get those things right. Like,
yeah. Well, and another thing in that same special effects shot, they're using these beams of nucleonic radiation. And I'm going, really? You're firing protons and neutrons at it to heal it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Because that's what nucleonic radiation would be. Radiation consisting of nucleons, which are protons and neutrons.
Yeah.
But they're firing these beams of protons and neutrons at the cloud's wound. And Janeway says, send one of them out of the fore and one of them out of the aft and align them with the axis of the ship. And then when they show it, there's a beam coming out of the front and the back, but they're like at 45-degree angles. They're not aligned with the axis of the ship. So again, the special effects guys didn't seem to get the script in time or something.
Right. They were like, that's all stupid. We're going to do what we want. And they can't say anything. So the other thing that really bugged me about this episode was Neelix, more so than usual.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Neelix later on in small doses. But in this one, he is really erratic.
Yes.
He's whiny.
So the first time that they go into the nebula, Neelix is in the mess hall with Kes, and he gets angry. He's ranting about Janeway taking the ship into the nebula and calls the crew idiots for going into harm's way.
These people are natural-born idiots, if you ask me, is what he says.
And like, okay, that just seems excessively harsh. And then we transition quickly to this really uncomfortable kissing scene between Neelix and Kes. Like, she finds the nebula romantic or something. And I'm like, oh, this is cringy. Very cringy.
We should note that she takes the initiative in the kissing. It's not Neelix forcing himself on her.
Yeah, I think she's trying to calm him down, or she likes it when he's all revved up or something. I don't know.
You know, I did like the scene though between Neelix and Janeway where she basically dresses him down and says dismissed, and he's standing there and it's like, oh, I'm sorry, that's Starfleet for get out.
Right.
Yeah.
Neelix comes into her office acting like a crazy person and a prima donna about the ship going back into the nebulator, and he wants her to leave him and Kes off the ship in his little ship until they're done. And she's like, yeah, when we're finished, if you want to leave, that's your business. But for the moment, find yourself a seat with a good view, because just like Jonah and the whale, you're going in.
Yeah, exactly.
I did like that line, just like Jonah and the whale, you're going in. That was a good one. But yeah, I mean, Neelix is tough to take on, in the early seasons on a good day. But in this episode, it was just, he was out of control. It was just really, it
was just such a weird choice for how they played him in this one. I mean, I can understand, being someone who not familiar with the way Starfleet does things, which is to rush into everything as quick as possible to check everything out. But I mean, he was just whiny and belligerent and just, And
then he goes down in the middle of a crisis that is a very brief duration. He makes tons of food without a replicator, apparently.
Right.
And brings it up to the bridge and proclaims himself morale officer. So he's just done a caterpillar to butterfly transformation off screen in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, well, exactly. Apparently that Janeway dressing down, straightened him up. He's flying right, and he's with the program now. Apparently, it was it's very erratic, very weird, and it's not the character per se. It's just the writing was poorly written. I mean, I just have to say it.
And like you said, Jimmy, this was an episode where they tried to cram so much character development that there was no plot, and they're just more concerned about the character development. And you wonder if some of this would have been better spread over 2 or 3 episodes
that had actual stories.
Stories, because they could have fleshed this out with this nebula and the reaction of Voyager going into it, and the wound and everything. Oh no, that was just kind of an afterthought.
Well, apparently, when they were writing this, they had the story of the nebula, and they're like, okay, that's not enough script. Yeah. So let's throw a bunch of stuff in to fill it out.
Yeah.
That's literally what happened.
And it literally shows when you're talking about the whole conversation on the bridge for 3 minutes about Chakotay and his animal spirit and all that. Right. It literally was just like, okay, we're approaching this nebula, so tell me about your animal spirit.
Yeah, I know. It's so out of nowhere.
We get some time now.
You know, the same thing with Neelix deciding he's now the morale officer. Oh, we're approaching the nebula. Oh, here's some food.
Yeah.
What?
I think part of this may have been a reaction to Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which is famously bad in some respects, because you have the Enterprise entering the Voyager cloud, and for scene after scene, we're watching nothing but special effects. Right. And I even have in my note and shots of the crew reacting to what they're seeing on the view screen. Right. And so this episode is a bottle episode. They never get out of the ship. It's all filmed on the standing sets. And it's again the same thing of the main plot of this is they're experiencing a bunch of special effects on the view screen. So this episode is like watching people watching television.
Yes. Right.
In its A plot. And so they need to do something to avoid a replication of, wow, that episode was so Star Trek: The Motion Picture. They're just flying through a cloud and special effects happen and there are plot complications.
That would have been a better episode. Oh,
well, that's why they then do this, but they throw in all this extra stuff. But it's yet another episode where the solution is talking dramatically over consoles and they have to punch through some kind of barrier.
Yep.
I noticed that was so first season on Voyager. They're always getting out of things by punching through barriers.
Right.
And
again,
it's not just punching through
one.
barriers, it's punching through some kind of barrier.
Some kind of barrier, right.
I think there was like 3
of
some kind ofs in this episode at least.
Yeah. So there's also another element from the supercuts. Remember we talked about that supercut video of the some kind ofs throughout all of Voyager? We also have our first instance of a count of the photon torpedoes.
Yeah.
Chakotay says we have 38 photon torpedoes, and Janeway says we have no way to replace those when they're gone.
Yeah.
And I think that the supercut was something
way.
like 50 or something like that by the time it was done, wasn't it? I can't remember the number.
300.
300.
Like, it's in the hundrds that they end up having after all 7 seasons. Shuttles.
I liked so normally on this show, because they're away from Federation resupply bases, they a bunch of the resource stuff makes sense. The resource limitations make sense. They should encounter resource problems on this show. They should be finding ways to deal with that. But normally the writers are so lazy that the only reference we ever get is replicator rations. That's the only evidence that they have limited resources much of the time. And then they betray that by letting Tom Paris run his elaborate holodeck scenarios.
Right.
In the same way, I want to give him points for realizing early on where you have a limited number of photon torpedoes and no way to replace them. And so good for establishing that, but then bad for the execution of letting it run into the hundreds by the end of the show.
They should have had a whiteboard in the writer's room with, it says, photon torpedoes and a count. And every time they've shot one,
mark it off.
And the same thing with shuttles. Let's just say that.
Well, instead they let Tom Paris completely build a brand new shuttle out of apparently hopes and wishes. I don't know.
A better shuttle.
A better shuttle. Which, don't get me wrong, I like the Delta Flyer. I thought it was an awesome shuttle, but he kind of built it out of nowhere. Now, there was one character we haven't talked about yet, and that's the Doctor. I like the Doctor in this. He is just mean. I mean, it's great.
One of my favorite bits with him in this episode, so for me, there were kind of 2 favorite Doctor moments. One is where he's being a little snarky and Janeway mutes the audio on him. And so he's like, we see him in the background on the view screen, kind of rolling his eyes and walking around and finally waving his arms to get their attention again. And I really like that. I also like the bit where when he's turned on and he says, please state the nature of the medical emergency. B'Elanna asks him, why does he always say that? And he says, well, I can only speculate about my programmer's intentions. Well, why don't you change it? Ooh, a hologram that could reprogram itself. What would I do with that ability? Create a family? Raise an army?
Yeah. And of course, what does the Doctor do? He raises a family. He makes art, becomes an artist, a singer. So he actually does that.
Yeah.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Raise an army part, though.
Yeah.
Yes. Although he almost becomes leader of a planet, but that's a future episode. Well, I really like that they introduced the idea that he was the whole Dr. Zimmerman thing. That interesting, funny repartee with B'Elanna and he says, "Oh, you'll find Dr. Zimmerman at the Jupiter station. He looks a lot like me, and you can thank him for my personality, or however."
Yeah, exactly.
And we get to see Zimmerman later.
By the way, in favor of the doctor's standard greeting, I had some experience once calling a local 911 because of an emergency that happened. And I was amazed that 911 didn't have the equivalent of "please state the nature of the medical emergency." I had to find a way to get the needed information to them on my own. They were not really set up. It's surprisingly, they were not set up to immediately ask the nature of what's happening.
Really?
Yeah.
I think when I've called 911, it's been 911. What's your emergency?
Yeah, that would be reasonable.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting that they didn't.
Yeah, I've only called 911 a couple of times, and that's usually what I hear too. Is something like 911. What's the emergency? So
yeah. So another cringy character moment. Kim and Paris on their way to the holodeck in the middle of the night. And Kim tells Paris that he remembers being in his mother's womb. And I'm thinking, why are we being told this? This is a weird, weird moment.
I'll say though, Robert Duncan McNeil played that perfectly, where you could see the cringe on his face when he said it. When Kim said it, it's like, why am I having to hear this as part of my character?
Right? He says, nothing. Kim says, "What do you have to show me in the holodeck?" "Nothing that's going to compare to that memory of your mother's womb." Which
that was a good line.
Yeah, but it was such a weird line to throw in there. Like, you've just made Kim really weird. Like, it's just
it's also impossible because our brains do not form memories that retain at that stage.
No.
It's also like, why would that be a comforting memory? Anyway. I don't want to talk about that.
I was wondering about, so on the flip side of that, Paris breaks into Kim's quarters while he's sleeping, and then rags on him for wearing a slumber mask. Right. And I'm going, what's the big... I wear a slumber mask, at least in the early morning hours when there's more ambient light and I want to go back to sleep. They've got all kinds of ambient light in those quarters. I could easily see someone wanting to shut it out.
Well, if they fly past a star or other bright spatial anomaly, it'll shine right in those windows, which don't have shades.
And they've got all this electronics in there. I mean, it's like, look at a typical person's bedroom these days. You may not, as an adult, want a nightlight, but you've probably got little light sources in your room anyway from all these indicator lights on your electronics.
Yeah. Not alarm clocks and everything else,
So Kim says it's because his roommate in the academy would study algorithms until dawn. I'm not even sure what that means, studying algorithms until dawn. But and then he says, well, I didn't change roommates because he got me through fourth year quantum chemistry. And that got me thinking, I would love somebody to go through all of the Star Trek episodes, because, this is what Trekkies do, and compile the curriculum for Starfleet Academy, because they have the weirdest courses. I mean, quantum chemistry, but everyone has to take, 23rd century politics of the Dalton quadrant, or Dalton, sector or something. Like these very bizarre esoteric courses, and
temporal mechanics
Over time, there's like this. I bet you could compile what the list of courses that they've had to take, and it would be very amusing to me. But
if it's not out there, there's a call to our listeners. We need this. This needs to be a Wikipedia entry.
Yes, or the Memory Alpha,
Memory Alpha. There you go.
Memory Alpha wiki. Yes, Trekkies, unite, or Trekkies assemble. I'm crossing the streams there. So
I have the feeling it would end up being something like the curriculum of Greendale Community College. I don't know
from Community.
I don't know if you've ever seen that show, but it's like they have a course called Ladders.
Oh man! So the episode ends with Kim bringing Captain Janeway to Chez Sandrine. That's the Paris's holodeck program. Where everyone else apparently is there, the rest of the senior crew and a bunch of junior officers, and Janeway, of course, turns out to be a pool hustler, of course, and all that. So nothing very interesting in Sandrines, frankly. It's a distraction.
Except all these Tom Paris smarmy characters who,
insight into psychology,
Yeah, I guess they think that this is supposed to be fun to watch these smarmy characters, and I don't know.
I have to say, it's very uncomfortable thinking about Paris making out with a hologram.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's as a cultural or social activity, like that's not just watching a movie or watching a show. That's kind of participating. It's
Exactly.
weird. Is it not weird?
Yeah, I
was
totally agree
uncomfortable.
with Futurama. The space pope says, "Don't date robots."
I agree, and that includes holograms, even though they're not
Yeah.
really robots. But yes, It's a very it strikes me as potentially morally problematic. Let's just say that.
You could strike the word potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah, I'll strike that. I'm hedging my bets on that. So, I'm run out of things to say about this episode. Do you guys have anything left to say about this?
We
No.
talk to animals.
I do too. They usually don't respond, though. They kind of tilt their head and look at you like, are you going to pet me or not?
Yeah.
It's going to turn into a Disney animated movie with Captain Janeway as Snow White. So before we finish it, we do have some feedback. I want to bring that up. On our episode number 66, we talked about the search for Spock. John Coe writes on Facebook, he corrects me, Mark Lenard's first on-screen appearance since Journey to Babel was in the motion picture, where he was the Klingon captain killed at the beginning, not Search for Spock. So thank you for that,
wow.
John.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I did too. Yeah, so I appreciate that correction. Trek fans are they're nothing if not very
thorough.
particular about the details. Yes.
Yeah.
And then on episode 65, where we discussed The Enemy Within, the original series episode, Kathy S. commented on YouTube, said, I have to respectfully disagree with Jimmy Dom and Father Corey on your critique of the moral lesson of this episode. When Spock talks about every man needing both his good and evil side, the writers would not have meant it, I don't think, as an excuse for immorality or an excuse to tolerate immoral behavior in others. 50 years ago, the idea of people like the American psychologist William James were still prevalent. James said something like, virtue destroying vice is not true heroism. Virtue triumphant, with her foot upon the neck of vice, holding it down, is the glory of humanity. And she says, I've really flubbed that quote. But the point was that here on Earth, we're meant to continually fight the good fight against temptations and the more savage part of us, and that struggle is a permanent and maybe the best aspect of the human experience. And she adds parenthetically, in fact, it's the basis of pretty much all great stories. So what do you think?
I mean, it sounds like a good explanation of the fighting against temptation and original sin and all that, but
Right.
I agree.
I would still totally take victory over prolonged struggle.
Yeah.
Right.
So I recognize that struggle is the essence of drama.
Yes.
And the reason we're programmed to like drama is because we will have to face dangerous situations in life. And so we need to mentally think through dramatic situations because we one day will encounter drama in real life. So we need to be prepared intellectually and emotionally to face such situations so we don't fall apart in them. That means we need to game them out in our heads ahead of time. And in order to get us to game them out in our heads ahead of time, we need to find them fun. And that's why we have an inbuilt, God-given instinct for play and fantasy and drama and fiction to help us deal with real-life struggles. But I would still take victory.
Right. I think when we're talking about like the Spock extolling the evil side, I mean, that's the question. Is it's the negative emotions, the negative elements?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that that's the same thing as the part of us that fights. I think the good part of us also fights.
Right. I think in the episode they're ambiguous when they talk about people's evil or dark sides. Are we talking aggression or are we talking because that's neutral, morally speaking, or are we talking moral? And I think the episode is unclear about that, which I think is part of the source of the issue, because depending on how you classify these things, it will or won't be important to have the quote-unquote negative side.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy and John, for your comments. We really appreciate hearing from you. So before we finish, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Secrets of Star Trek, including Rob G., Devin W., Travis R., Rocco F., and Mitchell F. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. All right, so that's it from us. What did you think of Voyager's episode of The Cloud? Did you like it better than we did? Did we miss anything? Let us know by visiting sqpn.com/trek or the SQPN Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can also send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. And we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the Enterprise episode, Terra Nova. Until then, Father Corey Stika, thank you for joining me in sharing the Secrets of Star Trek.
Glad to be here, and thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
Thank you, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, dismissed. That's a Starfleet expression for get out.